Order! Carry on.
O karikot ko yagi aptigid uglumi matuniga tamagdana magtumitupagputa wakatiga paglitan ako yung lapirigiptigid yang nito alawir ating agutibo nipting ni atoktopat ato matikawad handayak tayo winhawag niyo alawir Jesus im ating agut apirigiptigid. Amen.
Please be seated. Good afternoon, members. Minister's statement. Minister Kutlan Godan and the Minister Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to speak about foster care and the important role of Foster Family Coalition of the Northwest Territories has played and will continue to play in partnering with Child and Family Services to improve recruitment, training, and support of foster families. Foster families perform a vital service to children that must be placed in care. And I want to recognize and thank all foster families from across this territory for the valuable support they provide to our children and youth. Mr. Speaker, for the past several years, the Foster Family Coalition of the Northwest Territories has worked to recruit foster families, has offered support, assistance, and training to foster families, has organized summer camps for foster children from across the Northwest Territories, and represented the perspectives, needs, and concerns of foster parents in meetings and conversations with the Child and Family Services system. The Foster Family Coalition of the Northwest Territories is established by concerned foster parents from across the territories and provides an important voice for those foster families. Today, the Coalition is releasing a new recruitment strategy and a video to recruit new foster and adoptive parents across the Northwest Territories. This initiative is in collaboration with the Department of Health and Social Services. Using the catchphrase, "We need you," the Coalition wants to send the message to prospective foster families and adoptive families that they will not begin their journey as foster or adoptive parents alone. In fact, they'll become part of a large team that is working together to ensure children are receiving consistent and quality care with a goal of family reunification and permanency. It is vital that we have more foster and adoptive families in the Northwest Territories so that our children have the chance to be placed in a home that suits them best when they need one. Mr. Speaker, foster care is one of the key areas identified by the Auditor General in their report tabled this past December as needing to be improved, and it is a priority area for the Department of Health and Social Services Quality Improvement Plan. As part of our quality improvement work, the Department has established a foster care quality working group. Mr. Speaker, it is a privilege for me to advise that the foster care quality working group will be co-led by the Foster Family Coalition of the Northwest Territories. The working group will recommend improvements to the foster care system, addressing the need to provide more consistent support to foster parents across all regions and to improve foster care training for all N.W.T. foster parents so that foster families have a better information and strategies as they respond to the important needs of children in care of the Child and Family Services system. Mr. Speaker, I want to formally acknowledge our partnership with all foster families and with the Foster Family Coalition of the Northwest Territories that represents the interests and concerns of our foster families. We look forward to continuing to work together with them through the Foster Care Quality Working Group to improve support, training, and services to foster families so that we can make sure that every child and youth in the N.W.T. stays safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member for Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of my favorite things about this job is that every day I learn something new. Obviously, I've had to learn a lot about how laws are made. The specifics of the legislative process aren't as widely known as they could be, so I thought I'd share what I've learned with the public. It all starts with an idea about how to make things better. Then that idea is developed, expanded, refined, or combined with other ideas into a bill. Just because an idea gets turned into a bill doesn't mean the idea was good to begin with. So the legislative process helps us improve worthy ideas and weed out bad ones. The first mention of a bill in the Legislative Assembly is when the sponsor, which is either a minister or a regular member, gives notice of first reading. 2 days later, the sponsor makes a motion that the bill will be read for the first time, and members vote as to whether or not the bill should proceed further. If it passes, then the bill is reprinted and members and the public can see its contents. Prior to the vote, no one other than the sponsor actually knows what's in the bill. If defeated, the bill never sees the light of day, and its merits are never publicly debated. So, Mr. Speaker, because members don't know the contents of the bill, what they're really voting on is whether or not they want to be exposed to a new idea. Because it's commonly accepted that the ability to present and debate ideas is an indispensable cornerstone of democracy, first reading is usually just a formality, and many legislations don't even bother with a vote. However, new ideas can be scary. They can pose a threat to the status quo and to existing power structures. So those who fear change may prefer to censor ideas. The ability to kill a bill at first reading is a wonderful tool for partisan government, where suppression of a minority is the key, but I find it oddly out of place in our consensus model. Perhaps the power to put people back in their place when they step out of line is just part of the colonial baggage that we inherited as part of the Westminster system. Mr. Speaker, I'm optimistic that eventually we'll shed that baggage, because like I said at the beginning of this sitting, change is on the horizon. Mr. Speaker, I hope to explain the entire legislative process, but I've run out of time. I guess I won't make it past first reading. But I appreciate the common decency and commitment to free speech that you've displayed by allowing me to speak. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ike-Godin, Member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the basic needs of families and communities is to be able to take care of their children. Currently, a number of families in Yellowknife are facing a difficult situation. Mr. Speaker, just before Christmas, the Kids Corner daycare in my riding closed its doors. With only 2 weeks' notice of its closure, about 30 families of kids aged 1 through 4 were sent scrambling to find alternative care. But they don't have any options, Mr. Speaker. There aren't enough spaces to meet the demand. The Yellowknife Daycare Association, which recently opened its new building, already has a waiting list of nearly 150 kids. Working with the Yellowknife Women's Society, the affected parents have come up with a solution, but it requires renovations to bring the Yellowknife Women's Society's building up to code for daycare operations. That requires significant capital funding. But the parents have been told that there will be no government support for capital investment. The department has stated in the past that it doesn't want to interfere with a private market-driven industry. But Mr. Speaker, the private market isn't providing daycare spaces. Our communities are simply too small to generate a business case for the private market to invest in new infrastructure. There is no return on investment. Mr. Speaker, we have hit a wall. There won't be more daycare spaces without a government commitment to new capital infrastructure funding. Families will go without an essential service. The department needs to step up and get these facilities built. Once the facilities are there, NGOs or parent cooperatives can take on the management and operations. But without the actual bricks and mortar, that can't happen. This lack of infrastructure is also leading to a rise in the number of unlicensed day home operators. That can result in more children being put at risk, and that's not acceptable by any definition. Mr. Speaker, for young families, it's essential to have access to reliable, safe, progressive childcare. Without it, their ability to pursue a career, achieve financial security, and allow their family to grow and prosper is compromised. That goes directly against our mandate priorities for stronger communities. Mr. Speaker, a reliable childcare system is an investment in our future. I urge the Minister to consider stronger support for childcare infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Colleagues, I'd like to draw your attention to visitors in the gallery. Colleagues, today, please allow me to draw your attention to the presence in the gallery today with us, Mr. Anthony W.J. Whitford. As many of you know, Mr. Whitford is a man of many roles. Former commissioner, former speaker, former minister, former member, former sergeant at arms, honorary clerk at the table, and member of the Order of N.W.T. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Whitford to the House this afternoon. It's always a pleasure when he visits the House. And at the same time, members, I'd like to recognize some of the visitors in the gallery as well. First, we have with us Julia and Max Turnert of Hay River, parents of Brenda Lynn Turnert, who works in the clerk's office. Join me in congratulating them on their 58th wedding anniversary, which they just celebrated last month. Secondly, please welcome Yannick Noack, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, who joins us from land down under. He is visiting from Elizabeth, South Australia. Good day, mate. Welcome to our assembly. Member statement. Member Ika Godan and the member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today is our last winter sitting with the budget and legislation deliberations. Mr. Speaker, as we heard from yesterday's retirement announcement from the Honourable Finance Minister, R.C. McLeod, Mr. Speaker, as a first-term member of this institution, I certainly witnessed many sacrifices made by public officials, endless time away from home, families, friends, for contributions in making a difference to this territory. Given my experiences on how government operates and the many challenging decisions that must be made in achieving prosperity in all areas such as high cost of living in the family home, the business environment, the classroom, and more importantly, demonstrating to our federal counterparts that we are ready and our ability for self-determination. Mr. Speaker, yes, over the past several financial budget deliberations, we did not always agree. However, the minister, being from a small community, understands small community limitations, challenges, family hardships due to lack of jobs in most cases. Along with his career experiences, has provided knowledge on balances needed in the best interest for the government of the Northwest Territories and the residents. Mr. Speaker, we now have the last 2019-2020 budget that will produce meaningful change in our job creation, while maintaining operational and maintenance delivery of programs and services. In the very near future, Mr. Speaker, when I come to see construction site jobs at the Great Bear River Bridge, Toledo Health Center, and the Children's Cove Lake School, I will certainly think on the past and reflect to the statement, the best social program is a job. Mr. Speaker, in building on similar relationships to the principles as set out in the co-management land claim agreements and intergovernmental councils, I look forward to our committee's community consultations on the pre-approved legislations passed during this sitting. In closing, I want to thank the Minister of Finance for his public contribution and dedication. Now, Mr. Speaker, he can enjoy quality time with his family. Masi.
Merci. Member statement. Member Ika Godan and the member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Yesterday, the Premier gave the keynote speech he called, quote, "Purgatory and Persistence, the Case for Economic Self-Determination in the Northwest Territories," end of quote, at the Arctic Oil and Gas Symposium in Calgary. Purgatory? Really? This Red Alert 2, this Red Alert Part 2 negative messaging won't encourage investment in the N.W.T. and the transformative change we need. The Premier is stuck in a time warp where fossil fuels dominate the N.W.T. and world economy. This is not going to happen given climate change realities, commodity prices, and technological change. Blaming the media in southern Canada won't change history. The revisionist version of the Mackenzie Gas Project is also not helpful. N.W.T. bent over backwards to give away our resources. We signed letters locking in royalty rates for the anchor fields at the pathetically low federal rates, signed an unenforceable socioeconomic agreement, and rejected most of the joint panel review recommendations to maximize benefits for Northerners. In the end, it was the developers that caused most of the delays. Market forces are what sunk the joint venture. If it had gone ahead, taxpayers would undoubtedly be subsidizing it now and for years to come. Mr. Speaker, my patience is wearing thin with a mega project approach to economic development put forward by the Premier and his cabinet. This only makes us more dependent on non-renewable resource development, vulnerable to commodity prices, open for more control by external corporate interests, and subject to further boom-bust cycles. An all-weather road into the Slade Geological Province to subsidize mining during a caribou crisis is no example of sustainable or responsible development. Mr. Speaker, there's always money for roads, but nothing for the caribou crisis. Despite having a multi-party range plan for the Bathurst caribou developed for more than 4 years, we seem to be waiting until the caribou are gone, removing obstacles for the road. Tolson expansion will be a $1 billion boondoggle based on the experience of many other hydro projects across the country. It's not clean power. Just ask people in Fort Resolution about the impacts of today's Tolson. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Masi. Member statements. Like another such a suha, the neck carry the Amik anyone. What you can anyone? Member Frame Lake, such a no, another member statements. Okay.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. A project based on unconfirmed and hypothetical buyers will divert funding and effort away from building real energy self-sufficiency, especially in our small communities. If the Premier and his cabinet want transformative change, the message to Ottawa and the world should not be more of the same. We must build a knowledge economy through a polytechnic university, push energy self-sufficiency, and invest in the conservation economy. Non-renewable resource development can and should still play an important role, but when this overshadows everything else, that's purgatory. Must see, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Member statement. Member Ike Godan and the member Cam Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today marks 201 days until the next election, 6 months until a new government takes its place to set the priorities for the 19th Legislative Assembly. It's also the last day of our winter sitting. We have passed the last operations and maintenance budget and set the course for the final stretch of this Assembly. This government has made progress on many issues: mental health programs, housing, 911, an office of the Ombud. But these past weeks have demonstrated that this government is willing to move if it is only on the terms of the cabinet, regardless of the consensus of regular members. This government's seemingly #1 priority has been to make political expediency its goal over allowing the necessary time for effective and properly consulted, considered, vetted, and then, and only then, implemented legislation. There have been many changes to precedent in the 18th Assembly: our first two-term Premier, a formal mid-term review, a mandate for the government, and now the size and complexity of the bills before committees that is also unprecedented. This government's work of setting up new regimes for control over this territory's land and resources must not be rushed. It's far too important to the economy, for future generations, and for Indigenous nations that this House not rush to the finish line and claim mission accomplished just in time for the writ to drop on September 1st. I have no doubt there would be room for compromise, for compromise lies at the heart of the democratic process. But the rules of this institution give ministers an absolute veto over any proposed amendments. This, combined with a rushed committee review process, will directly impact the effectiveness of members to bring improvements to complex and lengthy bills. Cabinet has the deck stacked in its favor. They are the banker, they are the dealer, and they have ensured they hold all the best cards up their sleeves. I believe my honourable colleague from Yellowknife Centre framed our current situation best in a recent Facebook post. Consensus is out the window, replaced with the government overloading committees so they can check commitment boxes. This is not how good legislation is made. In a consensus government, wouldn't the government work with committees to achieve that end? Not in this consensus government. Mr. Speaker, politics is about people, the people who are elected to this House and the people we all serve. If Northerners or members want a better government, they only need to take action to achieve it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement, Member Godani, the Member Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to acknowledge the youth of Fort McPherson who decided above all odds to hike from Curtin Mountain some 90 miles through the mountains and creeks to Fort McPherson. This idea came from the youth for the youth. Mr. Speaker, there are many opportunities for our youth to go out on the land and learn. This project is unique for the youth. Definitely wanted to be out on the land, but using a different approach to reviving their culture. This is where it all started. A trek would be best, where they would snowmobile through the mountains to Curtin Mountain and then walk back to town. Mr. Speaker, the trek took 6 days. 5 snowmobiles were spotters. This was challenging and exciting. Each of the youth had mentors. Each day something new was taught. They learned traditional skills, how to read the weather, but most of all, basic survival skills. Congratulations to the following. You have paved the way for more adventures for our youth. Dean Charlie, Marvin Snowshoe, Jordan Stewart, Abraham Stewart, Edwin Kay, Joe Kay, John Francis, Robert James Francis, Angel Cooey, and Donna Snowshoe. They all arrived home to a warm welcome from the community, safe and sound, happy to be home, and feeling proud of themselves as they should be. Keep up the good work as you are our future leaders. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member statement, Member Ike Godani, the Member Yellowknife Centre.
Massey, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've spoken many times in this House about the need for accessible and affordable childcare. It is one of our mandate commitments, but during the life of this Assembly, there has been a growing crisis of supply of licensed childcare here in Yellowknife. There are 2 issues that stand in the way of easing this supply problem. The first is that licensed childcare provides modest income to providers. This is the reason that licensed childcare is usually provided by nonprofits. The introduction of JK has taken a toll even on nonprofit childcare. It took kids over 3 out of the mix, leaving the youngest kids who need more staff to care for them. The whole sector has downsized. Unless nonprofit providers are able to bring significant economies of scale to the table, like the YK Daycare did by offering 100 spaces, it's difficult for them to break even. In short, ECE has disrupted the supply of licensed childcare for children ages 0 to 3, killing even limited profitability. Mr. Speaker, the second issue is finding a space for childcare that meets building and fire code requirements. These are exacting and appropriate standards to ensure children are safe. I recently learned that there is no space available for rent in Yellowknife that meets these requirements. Renovating buildings to meet the code is expensive. There's often hazardous material abatement involved, as well as improved fire separation walls and floors. Mr. Speaker, if there's no appropriate space in Yellowknife, what are the chances of there being space ready to move into in the regional centres, let alone in the small communities? This is a significant problem because 11 communities don't have established licensed childcare. The repercussions of this crisis are significant. Both parents and caregivers can't keep working, and they're taking their taxable income with them. Of course, or worse, they are making plans to leave the N.W.T so they can continue their careers while having easier access to licensed childcare. Mr. Speaker, the bottom line here is that in order for N.W.T. residents to access childcare, the government is going to have to invest in infrastructure. The cost of constructing and renovating buildings is beyond the reach of nonprofit budgets. The minister has said she's working on a comprehensive plan to make childcare more accessible. I'm looking forward to hearing how. Merci.
Masi. Member statement. Member Ike Godan and the member Nahende.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, about a month ago, my colleague from the Mackenzie Delta talked about health care in our small communities. He mentioned something that I've heard about before myself. People bring in their concerns to the health centers only to get sent home with the Tylenol pills. It left me wondering not only if people are getting the care they need, but if they're getting the advice they need when it comes to drugs like Tylenol. Because Tylenol is a common brand and easy to get, and because it's not like other kind of painkillers like Advil and Motrin, which can hurt the stomach, you might think that it's pretty harmless. But these are still some pretty serious risks, and I'm concerned that these risks aren't well enough understood. The main ingredient in Tylenol, as many other painkillers, allergy medication, and sleeping aids, is acetaminophen. It breaks down in your body, and one of the byproducts is a substance that's highly toxic to the liver. Even more so is if you've been drinking alcohol. If you take more than what you're supposed to, take it for longer than you're supposed to, or drink too much before or while you're taking it, the health consequences can be serious: liver damage, liver failure, or even death, although those cases are rare. I recognize that we need to take charge of our own health, which means reading dosage instructions and finding out how new medication might interact with current medication. That's good common sense. Mr. Speaker, my challenge is the kind of direction people in our small communities might be getting from staff at the health centers. The staff have a great deal of authority on their side and can be very intimidating to ask or to question a nurse or doctor, or to ask for a different opinion when offered a simple painkiller. And even if you do ask, you're not guaranteed to get the help you're looking for. There was a case like this in Wrigley last fall. We know from the work the Department of Health and Social Services is doing on cultural safety that many people in Northwest Territories often just don't feel safe or respected in their own healthcare system. I'd like to find out more about policies and practices in places around the use of these kinds of drugs in our health centers. So I'll ask some questions for the Minister later today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Member statements. Member for Nanakput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd just like to reflect a little bit back on this budget process. Mr. Speaker, we were off to a late start, and especially on an O&M budget like this, where I believe that we held back a few things, and when we hold back things, we hold back the government, we hold back communities in Northwest Territories. Mr. Speaker, this is not a capital budget where we could sit down and lobby and likely barter with Cabinet. I think this last process here is the very last one of this Assembly. When you hold something to the last minute, there's no room for capacity, there's no room for growth, and there's no room for any other issues that may come up during this Assembly. And this last one proved that, Mr. Speaker. I see in the future, in the 19th Assembly, I hope that O&M budgets get the time that they need to start properly and promptly, so that residents and MLAs that have families, MLAs that travel from out of the capital, have time to do that and stay fresh and healthy while we're going through this lengthy process. It'll give us time to focus on the bills that are upcoming this spring. I know we'll all go home and spend some time, much needed time with our family before we gear up. And I'd also like to thank all of my colleagues for the hard work that they've done on both sides. There's a lot of bills, a lot of leadership, and Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of things that we can improve on as well too during this Assembly. As we move forward, Mr. Speaker, I complained earlier about the progress. Now I'd like to also commend the Finance Minister, the member from Twin Lakes, for his speech yesterday. I almost had a tear in my eye. If I knew him another year, I would be crying right there beside him. But Mr. Speaker, that shows integrity, that shows honesty, and that shows commitment. So I'd like to commend the minister on that, and I wish him all the best this spring. And
Mr. Speaker, I see him finishing very well in this assembly. I'd like for all of our colleagues here to finish this assembly very well, and I just wish everyone good health this spring, and thank you to all the pages who come. There's a couple from Tuktoyaktuk here, as well as their chaperone, and everybody who's supported us through all this time. Mr. Speaker, our families, our wives, our husbands, and our partners have all given us the strength that we need to move forward. So I'd just like to wish everyone a good spring. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in a gallery. Colleagues, I'm pleased to draw your members' attention to the presence in a gallery today. With us is Pascal Bornel, Consul General of Switzerland, on the occasion of his second visit to the Northwest Territories. Accompanying Consul General is his wife, Mrs. Maria Elena Bornos Callan. Please join me in welcoming them to the House this afternoon. And on a different note, we did talk about possibly coming back for a third term with a new government, meeting with a new government. Masi. Recognition of visitors in a gallery. Member for Grace Lake.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to welcome the following people from the Foster Family Coalition who are with us here today. Dawn Pottinger, who is the President, Cami Roberts, the Executive Director, Corey Garvey, Megan McDougall, and Pat Gallagher. Thanks for all you do.
Masi. Member Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to welcome Max and Julia Brenner to the gallery. It's always nice to have people from Hay River here, especially when we're up here for so long. It really makes it feel like home, so welcome.
Masi. Member Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to once again recognize a constituent, a page of ours from Range Lake, Brooke Vallis, and of course all the other pages who did a fantastic job. I really wanted to pick out Brooke because even though it's the second time I've recognized her as the Minister of Status of Women, I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a long time look at what you can be when you decide, and this is a viable career that I'd like for you to consider as well, entering politics. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Almost a member statement. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too want to take this opportunity to recognize a man of many hats and titles and Yellowknife North constituent, Mr. Tony Whitford, and thank you for being here today.
Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. If we miss anyone in the gallery, thanks for being here with us. It's always great to have an audience as part of our proceedings. Masi. Acknowledgments. Acknowledgments. Oral questions. Member for Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have some questions for the Minister responsible for WSCC. In the N.W.T. in Nunavut, the total number of people employed is around 35,000. About a third of those people work for a territorial government or public entity, but those employers only pay 1/6 of all the revenue WSCC collects from employers. The rest comes from industry, small business, and municipalities, which last year generated $55 million in revenue for WSCC. In turn, WSCC paid out $34.5 million in claims to employees from those organizations. That's a difference of $20 million, and I'd just like to ask the Minister, what happens with that $20 million? Where does it go? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister responsible for worker safety compensation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on any given year, you never know what kind of claims you're going to get within workers' claims. We want to promote workplace health and safety, of course, both here in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut. And last fall, in 2018, we did develop a 2019 corporate plan, and that was through the Governance Council, which approves the operations and capital budgets on an annual basis. As I said, we don't know what kind of claims we will be getting on a yearly basis. For more detail, I will have to go back to WSEC and get that information for the member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the Kidade Cassie member, Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate that. I didn't give the minister enough heads up on this, and I got some technical questions here, so maybe I'll just jump to a different question. So not only does the government save money, or when the minister mentioned last time when he discussed this issue that in 1993, the OH&S function of government was transferred to WSEC. And at that time, not only did government save money by transferring this function to WSEC, the government also has what appears to be preferential rates from WSEC, and it has deep pockets so that if it's not compliant, it can easily handle any monetary penalty by throwing some taxpayer money at it. And it never has to worry about going out of business, generating revenue, any of that kind of stuff. So I don't like wasting people's times, and I don't like creating plans for the sake of plans, but I'd really like to see WSEC put forward a plan to shift these OH&S costs off the backs of private industry and back onto government. This wouldn't necessarily mean N.W.T employees would be performing these OH&S duties. It would probably be easier to just adjust the rates for government, but I'll leave those details to the experts. So can the minister commit to working with WSEC to develop such a plan? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister responsible for Worker Safety Compensation Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I had mentioned, the Governance Council does approve the budget on an annual basis. They develop a strategic and a corporate plan moving forward. Under this corporate plan, they are focusing on increasing the number of employers with an occupational health and safety program, as well as increasing occupational health and safety education in communities for vulnerable workers. As much as the member wants to move forward with private industry, and we also got to make sure that anybody that does business in the Northwest Territories also is held accountable for the health and safety of our residents and our people in our communities. I did table a document on oral questions earlier during this sitting. From my understanding, and I have committed to informing the Governance Council of the industry's concerns regarding the rate structure. I do believe that the Governance Council has recently met, and they have also agreed to review both the rates and the subclasses that were mentioned in questions that were asked me earlier on in this sitting. And I will stay by that commitment, and I will keep members who were concerned regarding this apprised of where we're moving forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Tadade Cassie member, Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not suggesting that we reduce safety in the territory. Everyone's all for safety. The other question I had was what portion of WSEC's budget is spent on occupational health and safety responsibilities, and I understand the minister doesn't have that information. So I was just wondering, for a final question, would the minister be able to commit to answering the questions that I provided in some sort of written form that I can then share with my constituents who have been raising these concerns with me? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for Worker Safety Compensation Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I mentioned, we do have a corporate plan that's out there. It's done on an annual basis. There is a budget breakdown within this corporate plan, but for the specifics on the OH&S, I will have to get that for the member, and I will commit to providing that in a written document. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Kennedy, the member, Hay River, Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a couple of us members today have spoken about the lack of daycare space and the need for capital investment in daycare infrastructure. My questions are for the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Mr. Speaker, adequate space for childcare has been an ongoing concern for some time. We all know that. I'd like to ask the Minister, does the department believe that the public or market is responsible for delivering the necessary space to house daycares, and that entrepreneurs, NGOs, or parents should be solely responsible for the capital investment for these facilities? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I do know that within the government of the Northwest Territories, we do try not to disturb market communities where there is a viable opportunity to make money. Why would the government be doing that when private individuals could be making that? And I adhere to that policy. I agree with it. However, when it comes to daycares are very expensive. It's difficult to operate them. My own experience operating a daycare for many years previously, we just scrape by. So I think that the government does have a responsibility at this point, and we are trying to help. We are providing, when daycares start up, there's $25,000 for a startup fee that they can get. They can get $10,000 for health and safety monies. If they're looking at expanding their daycares, they can get money for that. We subsidize the daily rate for every licensed daycare provider gets daily rates ranging between, for part-time, full-time, $19.81 a day to up to $49.56 per day per child in communities. So we're subsidizing the daycares directly. We're subsidizing the licensed daycare staff. There's a subsidy that we give, a staff grant on a quarterly basis to every employee that's in a licensed daycare. So although it's not everything and we're not providing 100%, we are trying our best to actually support daycares as well through our programs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question that Cassie member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the reply. There's no denying that everybody is very appreciative of the department's support through their programs and subsidies for daycare and childcare. That's very much appreciated. The Minister talked about market communities, but we also have non-market communities, and in particular, as the Honourable Member from Yellowknife Centre mentioned earlier, we have 11 communities that have no childcare whatsoever. So I'd like to ask the Minister, how is the Minister attracting investment in childcare centres in the 11 communities without childcare services? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 11 communities not having any daycare services it identifies a problem. It's a bigger problem than that. Many communities, not only do they not have daycares, they don't have any early childhood development support whatsoever. I've said over and over in the House how important it is to have supports for parents and for children. Not all parents have babies and know how to take care of them. I myself, my first child, didn't even know how to bathe my baby. We need supports for parents. In the 11 communities, however, Mr. Speaker, tend to be, the majority are smaller communities. The number of children that would be accessing those programs, a licensed daycare center, would not be financially viable for the community to do. So we're really trying to advocate for licensed family daycare homes. Small communities are very community focused. I've said that many times. We know that there's qualified people that have the right attitude and stuff. We're going to try to support them with the skills. We're actively trying to get people within those communities to provide support. If it can't be a licensed childcare center, then we're trying to get licensed day homes. Come to us. If I can put anything out in the public, come to us. If you're even interested, we will walk you through it. We will help you with the applications. We need to support our children as best as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. Tada Cassie member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, thank you to the Minister. It sounds like there might be some hope as it relates to possibly starting up at least some daycare homes in some of the communities that have no child care whatsoever at this time. I'd like to mention that this government has been asked in the past to support universal child care, and essentially it has rejected the idea due to the projected annual costs. But investment in childcare facilities could arguably be a better long-term commitment to the challenges facing adequate childcare. So I'd like to ask the Minister, will the Minister make a commitment to bring a department plan forward to her cabinet colleagues or to FMB to support additional or new funding for critical daycare infrastructure? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely. One of the mandate commitments actually within this 18th Legislative Assembly, developed by all members, I have to give credit to everyone, was to develop a plan for accessible daycare. So I am have the full intention to fulfill that commitment. It's a commitment not only that I as a minister, but also personal level that I think is important. And at that point, once we have a plan, I am hoping that all members will support the plan as we move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Nundere Cassie, member Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the minister's comments there. What I'm talking about a little bit more specifically is about a commitment to funding dollars that will actually go towards building infrastructure like daycare facilities. And so I appreciate that that would have to probably be a new ask, because if you were to take that away currently from the department, then some other program or service might have to suffer. I'd like to ask the minister, the investment in new infrastructure of any kind, of course, is significant. We all know that. If the department or the government can't make the commitment to new money for childcare infrastructure, can the government find ways to support those groups or individuals who might consider it through the form of, say, grants, guaranteed loans, or even federal matching dollar programs that might be available for new daycare facilities? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do appreciate the member's acknowledgement that our capital budget has been passed. We're at the end of the Legislative Assembly. There will be no new capital budgets coming forward in the term of this Assembly. And I mean, we have a 20-year capital plan, so even when I found out there was difficulties with a roof, I mean, it was a stress in a school. I had to go through for supplementary funding for that. So there is no extra money at this point to actually provide capital for daycare centres. It's quite expensive. I think that, I think we need to put it in a transition report. I think we need to remember, whoever is in this House, the next Assembly, please put it on a mandate. I think we need to, it's critical, we need to have that. And yes, any support we can give. Even with the centre in Yellowknife that was struggling, I met with them personally. I thought of all kinds of ways. Can we give advances towards their operational? Because like I say, we give between $19 to $50 almost a day. Could we advance those kind of fundings to support them? So and federally I'm willing to look at. I don't know what they can offer, but I'm willing to look at it. I give the commitment that my department will do whatever we can do to support any licensed daycare centre or family day centre that is willing to operate in the Northwest Territories to the best of our ability. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Hikere Canyon, the member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. March is National Social Work Month. Social workers play a vital role in our communities by supporting children and families. The inspiration this profession brings to our families is always and will always be recognized. Therefore, my first question to the Minister of Health is, what recognition to commemorate his staff is the department doing? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the department is providing some funding support to celebrate Social Work Month to all the different health and social services authorities and regional offices here in the Northwest Territories. There's a number of different things that we're doing, and I'll just list a couple of the activities rather than going through the comprehensive list. But there is a public screening of the National Film Board's film, We Can't Make the Same Mistakes Twice. It's a very thought-provoking and inspirational film that follows the story of one extraordinary social worker. A health and social services system is asking people to share their personal stories of positive impact social workers are having on their lives and their communities. And going along with the national theme, and this year the national theme is Real People, Real Impact. Posts on the N.W.T. BearNet and the Department of Health and Social Services website, the Northwest Territories Health and Social Services Authority are highlighting the important work of social workers. There's a bunch of media things happening in that way through our existing websites. And those are, to name just a few, there are a number of other things being done, not just by the N.W.T, but by other bodies as well, like the Social Work Association and those types of things. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, la Council Member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for paying that respect to that profession and the staff, more importantly in the smaller communities. Would the Minister also commit to sharing at the regional level or the community level a day set aside within the remaining period of this month to recognize the social worker in the smaller communities? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, the recognition that we're providing is not just for Yellowknife or the larger centres, but we're recognizing and attempting to recognize the important work that all the social workers do here in the Northwest Territories. And just as a note, not all social workers work for the government of the Northwest Territories. Some work for the Department of Health, some work for education, some work for housing. A lot of social workers are employed by NGOs. So I think it's important. I really thank the member for bringing this up, but it's really important for all of us in this Assembly to thank social workers, and I encourage everybody out there to thank a social worker today for all the important work that they do for residents of the Northwest Territories. Thank you.
Merci. Oral question, Tadade, Council Member Satu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the Minister for that statement. It's very comforting to know that the endless hours and the challenges this workforce and the staff is doing would be recognized. My next question there, Mr. Speaker, what advertising for this profession is being done at the high school level or at the workforce level to attract that profession? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm a firm believer that we need to recruit and retain local people for local work. To that end, with respect to the promotion of social workers as a career or a profession, we do have a staffing initiative underway focusing on the retention and recruitment of social workers in the North, activities to encourage youth to choose a career as a health and social services professional include things like promotion of health and social services careers during our community living fairs. It's a great opportunity to get into the communities, talk to people about health, wellness, social services, and careers. So we're using that opportunity. We're providing exposure to a number of school-age children through Take Our Kids to Work, another opportunity to bring young people in, to show them what these jobs are and how valuable they are and the type of difference these individuals can make in the lives of people throughout their communities and territories. We're also supporting our returning social work students with summer employment opportunities in their field of study, and this has been a way of encouraging recruitment and positive experiences in the profession. So we're doing a number of things to encourage people to pursue their profession, and once they pursue the profession, we're doing things to help them come back and practice in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, the member Nehende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to follow up on questions or my member statements to the Minister of Health and Social Services. First off, I know the department's been doing a lot of work with communities, especially on cultural safety. What kind of questions and concerns has the department heard about the use of Tylenol or similar drugs in their own health centers, including issues like the one raised by my colleague from the Mackenzie Delta, where people are getting sent home with a few pills? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after the member from Fort Providence raised his questions initially, and even before that, and since the members raised his questions, I've asked the authority to check to see how many official complaints or concerns have been raised with our quality assurance staff around Tylenol. And unfortunately, the answer is actually zero. Nobody's actually officially filed a complaint. Now, we do see concerns being raised on Facebook and other social media platforms, and the member from Fort Providence has also raised those issues specifically with me around Tylenol. So we do hear it. We haven't seen any official complaints. I would strongly encourage the member that if he is aware of people, not only could bring it to my attention, but also encourage people in your communities to approach quality assurance so that we can look into these situations where Tylenol may have been prescribed if they feel that that was not the appropriate thing to do. We need to learn from our experiences. We want to be a learning organization. Quality assurance is the mechanism to really help that happen. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Member for Decho, he's referring to, instead of Providence. Oral question, Nakida Kasi, member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought it was moving to another region, so I'm glad we got that cleared up. I agree with the minister, but sometimes they don't feel comfortable in bringing forth, and we've been trying to work with the minister on those type of things, and I thank him for that information. Mr. Speaker, what policies or other rules are in place to make sure health center staff do some basic safety checks while distributing Tylenol or other similar drugs? For example, asking about alcohol use, liver health, and other factors that may affect dosage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I do have to remind the member that all of our nurses are licensed professionals who maintain license through competencies and training, and that they are trained to deal with exactly these types of situations. When a client does present to any healthcare setting with a physical complaint, nurses and other health professionals are required to basically complete an assessment along with inquiring about the relevant past medical history. This is part of the basic nursing education, and this occurs in any setting where nurses are involved with dispensing medications. Mr. Speaker, the clinical practice guidelines in the Northwest Territories Health Centre formulary are documents that are used in the community health centres by nurses. These documents provide a reference for a standardized approach to clinical care to assess and treat. Nurses are required to seek additional consultation from other healthcare practitioners if they feel that it's needed. And Mr. Speaker, I think these questions go to the questions that were asked yesterday by the honourable member for Yellowknife Centre about the types of questions that are being asked and how we're making sure that people understand why certain questions are being asked, in particular around things like alcohol and the negative impacts of interactions with certain drugs and alcohol that somebody may have consumed. So we obviously want to continue to improve in this area. I think our Cultural Safety Action Plan speaks to this particular issue and trying to make sure that we're asking the right questions at the right time and have people understand why questions are being asked. And as a note, Tylenol is the appropriate diagnosis or the appropriate treatment in some cases. So, I mean, it's not always the wrong or the inappropriate decision as may be suggested by some. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Oral question, Tada Kasi, member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the minister for that education. I didn't know nurses were, licensed. I never knew that, but I thank him for that answer here today. Mr. Speaker, I understand that, but when all we hear is Tylenol, that's an issue. I have got other questions about the policies and practice around Tylenol and similar drugs. There's been a lot of studies about how radical base affects how healthcare professionals deliver services, even when there's happened to be unconsciously, for instance, underestimating Indigenous people's account or experience of pain. How is the department working on cultural safety tracking, especially how healthcare professionals hear and assess patients' account for pain? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Masi. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I feel like this question goes to the very heart of the work that we're doing around cultural safety to make sure that all interactions with healthcare providers are done in a respectful way and recognize both the individual biases that an individual might have, but also the cultural realities that exist within their communities and many of their clients. As part of our work on cultural safety, the department is working on piloting different training, and that encourages healthcare providers to actually reflect on their own experiences and how their own biases may affect the views of individuals in their care, so that we can move beyond that and focus on the human being rather than the biases or or expectations or beliefs that may exist. We want to provide best care for our residents. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nundira Kasi member Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answers. And cultural safety that the department's doing, I think it's great. I honestly believe we as government should be all doing that, but I understand that we're trying to work to make sure it works well before moving it on. Now, I know the Minister has talked about this a lot, but it's important for people to know, so I think it's worth hearing again. If people feel that they're not getting the care they need at their local health centers, where can they bring their concerns? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's actually a couple different ways that individuals can actually interact with the system. We currently have a network of designated client contacts, quality assurance staff, that if somebody has a problem with the system or the services they receive, they can get in touch with. This often is after the fact when something has occurred, so that we can actually look into it to make sure if something went awry, we can make sure it doesn't happen again. We also have a system navigator, so if somebody's actually having troubles navigating a system and they have some concerns and they have a complex case, we would strongly encourage them to talk to the system navigator, who might be able to help them focus their journey through the healthcare system in ways that will actually give them maximum benefits. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, I do encourage people to ask your practitioners questions. If you're not sure what they're telling you, ask them for clarity. Our professionals want to be there to help. They're prepared to answer questions. If you don't feel like you're getting the answers that you need, or you're not getting an understanding of what is being explained to you, we have an obligation to do our best to make sure that our residents understand what is being said. And if that doesn't happen, you can always go back to quality assurance. I know I talk about it a lot. This is something we've only been bringing in the last couple of years, but it is something that will be a game changer over time and allow us to really learn from the challenges that exist in our system to make sure that these types of things don't happen. And that's a responsibility of not just the healthcare system, but everybody who engages with the healthcare system, to share your frustrations with us so that we can learn from them and make sure they don't happen again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Colleagues, I'd like to draw your attention to visitors in the gallery. We have with us today Carmen Moore. She's our very own chief protocol within our government system. Thanks for being here with us, doing a fantastic job. Merci. Oral question. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On September 27, 2017, my private member's bill, the Health Statutes Amendment Act, was passed. The Minister of Health and Social Services said the following, quote, I commit to working together with the Departments of Justice, Environment, Natural Resources, and Municipal and Community Affairs to develop a regulatory changes that may be required, end of quote, and, quote, the department will make it a priority to meet with other departments and map out the work required and the associated timelines, end of quote. Can the Minister provide an update of what is happening with regulation of cremation services here in the Northwest Territories? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the department is still doing the work on their portion of regulations under the Public Health Act. I have provided direction to the department. I've indicated that I'd like to see the regulations in health and social services under the Public Health Act done within the life of this government. I've been given assurances that barring any unforeseen crisis or challenges, that work will be done in the life of this government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Kidadea Cassie, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that. So I was going to ask the Minister about a timetable. He's provided one. What additional work needs to be done beyond regulations under the Public Health Act? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I need to ask for some clarity on this question. Can the member explain exactly what he's referring to? I mean, Health and Social Services has responsibility under the Public Health Act. Then other departments have other responsibilities in the city or the communities where crematoriums are being proposed have some responsibility as well. So just so I'm clear, what part of that question is the member asking? Because I'll do my best to answer any of them. Thank you.
Oral question, Tadadea Cassie, member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I know that the Minister loves to answer questions, so what other work does our government need to do to allow for cremation services here in the Northwest Territories? Thanks, Mr. Chair, or Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that does help, and I do like to answer questions. But before I get into sort of some of the work that still needs to be done, I do want to point out that there is no territorial law or regulation that prohibits the practice of cremation here in the Northwest Territories. The member did move a private member's bill, which actually will help strengthen some of the regulations around the public health aspect of providing crematorium services here in the Northwest Territories. But as we took a deeper dive in this, it became clear that Health and Social Services doesn't need to do anything or change anything actually to allow crematoriums to happen here in the Northwest Territories. We feel we have an opportunity to strengthen the practice and make sure that it's meeting certain standards, and we do thank the member for moving that legislation that'll allow us to do that, and we are committed to getting those regulations done. We have been meeting with the city as well as the other departments here in the Northwest Territories who might be affected, which include departments like MACA and E&R. And they're working with the municipality, obviously, to try and find some solutions to questions that are being raised about exactly how crematoria services and the disposition of byproducts might be addressed. I understand from my department, and I'll certainly need to seek some clarity, that there's nothing that's outstanding in Health and Social Services that would eliminate or challenge the existence of a crematorium here in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question. No did member Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that, and I hope that he could share the clarity or insight that he's going to get from his department with me. But can the Minister then, I just want to nail this down, Mr. Speaker, can the Minister confirm that there are indeed no actual barriers in our legislation or regulations that would prevent the operation of a crematorium in the Northwest Territories? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service.
Mr. Speaker, the member is correct. There is no territorial law or regulation that prohibits the practice of cremation in the Northwest Territories. As I did prior to the Public Members Bill, the Public Health Act actually provides the Chief Public Health Officer with the authority to take reasonable measures as she or he considers necessary in the circumstances to protect public health. So it existed. The Private Members Bill, which is a great example of how to move forward a private members bill in this legislation, is going to strengthen that. But it was available already. I can say that officials from the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs, E&R, Health and Social Services did meet with the city in June of 2018 to determine the full scope of other regulatory changes that may be required, but none of those exist within Health and Social Services. It's our understanding that currently there's nothing that limits it, but the city does have some challenges that they want some questions answered, and I understand that work is underway so that we can all together move forward and see cremation occur here in the Northwest Territories.
Oral question, the member Yellowknife Center.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Culture, Education and Employment. Mr. Speaker, we are at a crossroads where we have to take serious action on childcare in the N.W.T. Childcare can no longer be part of the market. It needs to be treated like education and health care. The benefits of early childhood education are undeniable, as the Minister knows from the work that she's done. Is the Minister prepared to take this step with childcare and bring it wholly within government? Thank you.
Merci. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would love to be able to say, yes, it's going to be a government responsibility. We'll provide the infrastructure, we'll provide the staffing, we'll provide the raises and everything. I do know that there is a province, that Quebec, that has done a universal childcare. And I may be wrong, but my understanding is that they are now struggling because the government is taking so much of a ownership over that. So when we do this, it's not an if, It needs to happen eventually. But when we do this, we need to be strategic, Mr. Speaker. We need to make sure that we've done our research. We need to make sure that's sustainable. One of the members in the question asked me before if I believed in universal basic income. And I thought, great idea. And then I did the research and realized basic income went for every person, and I went 30,000 times 44,000 people. That's $1.3 billion. Our whole budget's only $1.9 billion. So I think we have to be strategic. I think we need to support childcare, early childhood development, but we also need to make sure that it's sustainable and that we can afford it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, la Kidare, Council Member Yellowknife Centre.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll just say briefly, I'm not sure the minister fully understands basic income, but what I want to talk about is childcare. What we know is that the cost of finding and renovating space or building space from scratch for the nonprofits who currently provide childcare is not affordable, even with the $35,000 that the department offers. So my question is, what more funding can the government offer childcare providers in order to provide this essential service? Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the member's probably right. I mean, my whole knowledge of, my assumption of what guaranteed basic income was based on my own thinking. The research that I've done has mostly been on TED Talks. One of the members actually shared me some information on it. I was a little bit startled on it. So I am more than interested in meeting with the member if she wants to sit with me and educate me on further on what basic guaranteed income is, because I think it's something we need to look at as well. So what more support is? There's more than just the startup money, the safety money, and the expanding, and there's the daily rates. Right now, I mean, I can only speak about Yellowknife. I don't know the rates for all over the territories, but in Yellowknife alone, daycare is ranging around $800 to $1,000 a month. Just our operating monies that we provide to daycares from the government of the Northwest Territories for a full-time infant is $700 a month. That doesn't include the staff grants that we give. That figure I don't have on hand. So if I just took this $700 and averaging on the $1,000, parents would be paying $1,700 a month. So we are supporting it. So it's not only about the startup grants, it's all the things we do to support on the side as well. I agree, we need to do more, we need to do better, but we need to be strategic in doing that. One of the mandate commitments is to develop a plan, and I have made my commitment in the House here many times that we will be developing a plan before the end of this Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Tadare, Council Member Yellowknife Centre.
Merci, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for her response. The fact is that without infrastructure money, we can't create more daycare spaces. It costs tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to build or renovate spaces so that they meet the exacting code required by childcare. So a plan without any money for infrastructure is not going to move the bar on the need for licensed childcare in Yellowknife and in the communities without childcare. So is the minister going to produce a plan that has money attached to it? Thank you.
Merci. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am absolutely going to develop a plan that has money attached to it. We'll have what we are currently paying, what we project that it would cost, and the feasibility of that. Accessible daycare is not only about money that we provide to the daycares. I also want to say that in partnership with the federal government, we're also providing scholarships. What used to be 10, now we provide 30 scholarships for people from the residents from the territories to go in and take their early childhood development programming. We've expanded our programming at Aurora College to offer a 2-year diploma in early childhood development. So accessibility is not just about the fees that parents pay, it's also about having quality staff to do that. And so within the plan that I will bring forward, having accessibility will be not only about money, it'll be also about having the staff that we need to provide it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Merci. Oral question, Nundere, Council Member Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to try and refocus the minister. The department provides a modest amount of startup money. It provides subsidies for operators. It provides money for staff. We do not have the space to put the children in. We don't have the space. So my question for the minister is, how is she going to improve the supply of spaces, physical spaces, for children who need childcare? Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Speaker. So some of this, I mean, I do have to give credit to this Assembly, all of our members. I mean, the implementation of junior kindergarten in this one has provided free childcare spaces, free early childhood development programming to all 4-year-olds throughout the Northwest Territories. Over 500 children are taking advantage of this currently. So that's only a start. I know we still have 0 to 3 to do. But it's not only about spaces. Not every community is different, and that's what's really important to notice. Smaller communities, when they only have 3 or 4 kids that might need daycare, doesn't make sense to have a full center. Doesn't make more sense to have a family day home, jobs in communities, you know. So those are things we need to look at with that. But I also have to put it back on the members in some ways, and myself included. When we came into this Assembly 3.5 years ago, we defined mandates, we prioritized, we said what we wanted. For the last 3.5 years, we've been saying what we need, where we're going with this. It's only within this last few months that I've actually heard about the drastic need in this community in Yellowknife for infrastructure to do that. It's almost too late. We've already passed our final capital budget months ago. But I want to say that is this, and so I want to think out of the box as well, because that's what I'm doing. Does this have to be a licensed daycare centers that are standalone as the normal model? Or if you think within an Indigenous spirit, granted that I'm Métis, so I represent both cultures, is that within Aboriginal people, we always say education was the downside of us. They took our children away and they stole our culture. And yet Indigenous people are saying education is the key to regaining that culture. So I've already been talking with schools, and I've already been talking with my department and saying, can we make schools the hubs of communities? If our people are afraid of education, afraid of school systems, they're not going to bring their children there. So can we make a hub? And we're trying to work with health and social services together. Can we bring the services so that children can go to the school? There's a daycare, come for speech pathology, and I haven't even talked to the health minister, so I'm throwing things out there. But can it become a hub? So is the only model, is it a standalone daycare, or is another model we need to look at as making it a hub of communities? Those are questions we need to ask. I haven't got the answers yet, but it is part of the strategic plan that I will be bringing forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm pretty sure you can do another 17.
Massey. Oral questions. Oral questions. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Replies to Commissioner's opening address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Reports of Standing Special Committee. Reports of Committee on the Review of Bills. Reports of Committee on the Review of Bills. Tabling of documents. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following 2 documents entitled Interactivity Transfers Exceeding $250,000, April 1st to December 31st, 2018, and on behalf of the Premier, N.W.T. Economic Symposium, Northern Strength, Northern Prosperity, Symposium Summary Report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Tabling of documents. Minister for N.W.T. Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document entitled 2019-2020 Consolidated Operating Budget, Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Tabling of documents. Minister of Infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document entitled Follow-Up Letter for Oral Question 535-18-3 Paulson Hydro Expansion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. I hereby table the 2017-2018 annual report of the Legislative Assembly of Northwest Territories. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Member for... You're just giving notice. Let's see. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Notices of motion for first reading of bills. Notices of motion for first reading of bills. Motions. Member for Inuvik, Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, whereas Section 4, Bracket 1 of the Ombud Act provides that the Commissioner, on recommendation of the Legislative Assembly, shall appoint an Ombud as an officer of the Legislative Assembly who is responsible for exercising the powers and performing the duties set out in this Act. And whereas Section 1 to 14 of the Ombud Act will come into force on April 1st, 2019, and whereas the Board of Management was tasked with recruiting the Ombud and has recommended an individual to the Legislative Assembly, and the Legislative Assembly is prepared to make a recommendation. Now, therefore, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Mackenzie Delta, that Ms. Colette Langlois be appointed as Ombud for a term of 5 years in accordance with the Ombud Act by the Commissioner of the Northwest Territories as recommended by the Legislative Assembly, and further that the appointment become effective April 8, 2019. Thank you, Speaker.
Massey. The motion's in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Massey. Motions. Now to the member for Yellowknife Center.
Mr. Speaker, this is the moment I've been waiting for. I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Great Slave, that notwithstanding Rule 4, when this House adjourns on March 14th, 2019, it shall be adjourned until Thursday, May 23rd, 2019. And further, that at any time prior to May 23rd, 2019, if the Speaker is satisfied, after consultation with the Executive Council and members of the Legislative Assembly, that the public interest requires that the House should meet at an earlier time during the adjournment, the Speaker may give notice, and thereupon the House shall meet at the time stated in such notice and shall transact its business as it has been duly adjourned to that time. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. The motion is in order. To the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Massey. Motions. Motions. First reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Hay River South, that Bill, Bill 50, Supplementary Appropriation Act Infrastructure Expenditures Number 4, 2018-19, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Motion's in order. Motion's non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Bill 50 has had its first reading. First reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Great Slave, that Bill 51, Supplementary Appropriation Act Operation Expenditures Number 4, 2018-19, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Motion's in order. Motion's non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Bill 51 has had its first reading. First reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Thabacha, that Bill 52, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures Number 1, 2019-2020, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Motions in order, motions non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Bill 52 has had its first reading. First reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Range Lake, that Bill 53, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Operation Expenditures Number 1, 2019-2020, be read for the first time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Motions in order, motions non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Massey. Bill 53 has had its first reading. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I move, seconded by the Honourable Member for Nunavut Lake, that Bill 48, Post-Secondary Education Act, be read for the second time. This bill creates a structure for the recognition of post-secondary institutions within the Northwest Territories. The bill prohibits the establishment or operation of a university without the consent of the minister and an act of the Legislative Assembly. It prohibits the granting of a degree or the offering of any degree program without the authorization of the minister and allows a college to be recognized under the Act if its establishment or operation has the consent of the minister and is authorized by an act of the Legislative Assembly. The bill provides, with exceptions, that before consent or authorization can be given for any of these things, the minister must have received a recommendation from a quality assurance body. The bill also provides for the recognition and regulation of private training institutions and private vocational training, including the issuance of certificates of registration for either, and allowing for the appointment of a director of private vocational training. The bill requires reporting by public post-secondary institutions that receive regular and ongoing funding from the government, as well as by other institutions, including those that receive grants or contributions. Public institutions are also required to seek ministerial approval for tuition fees, regularly evaluate programs, prepare a mandate statement, as well as strategic and corporate plans, and prepare and submit annual operating and capital budgets. Finally, the bill contains provisions with respect to information sharing, enforcement, and offenses and penalties. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Motions in order to the principle of the bill. Questions been called? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Bill 48 has a second reading. It's now referred to a standing committee. Second reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Nunavut Lake, that Bill 50, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure Expenditures Number 4, 2018-19 be read for the second time. Mr. Speaker, this bill makes supplementary appropriations to the infrastructure expenditures for the Government of Northwest Territories for the 2018-2019 fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motions in order to the principle of the bill. Questions been called? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Bill 50 has a second reading. Second reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the Honourable Member for Hay River South, that Bill 51, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Operation Expenditures Number 4, 2018-2019 be read for the second time. Mr. Speaker, this bill makes supplementary appropriations for operation expenditures for the Government of the Northwest Territories for the 2018-2019 fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Motions in order to the principle of the bill. Questions been called. All those in favor? All those opposed, motion carried. Bill 51 has had a second reading. Second reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I move second by the Honourable Member for Thabacha that Bill 52, Supplementary Appropriation Act Infrastructure Expenditures Number 1, 2019-2020 be read for the second time. Mr. Speaker, this bill makes supplementary appropriations for infrastructure expenditures for the Government of the Northwest Territories for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Motions in order to the principle of the bill. Questions been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Bill 52 has had a second reading. Second reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I move second by the Honourable Member for Range Lake that Bill 53, Supplementary Appropriation Act Operation Expenditures Number 1, 2019-2020 be read for the second time. Mr. Speaker, this bill makes supplementary appropriations for operation expenditures for the Government of the Northwest Territories for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motions in order to the principle of the bill. Questions been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Bill 53 has had a second reading. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters. Bill 2630, Committee Report 1518-3, Minister Statement 131, Minister Statement 151, 158-183, Table Document 237-183, with Member Mackenzie Delta in a chair.
Thank you, Committee. I will now call the Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of Committee? Mr. Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, committee would like to consider table document 237-18 brackets 3, Independent Commission to review members' compensation and benefits 2018 review of members' compensation and benefits report, August 2018. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tester. We will continue after a short recess. Thank you. Call the Committee of the Whole to order. Committee, we have agreed to consider table document 237-18 brackets 3. I will now open the floor to general comments on the table document. Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm pleased to provide opening comments on this matter. In October 2017, an independent commission was established by the Speaker to review members' compensation and benefits. This review is a requirement of Section 35.1 of the Legislative Assembly and Executive Council Act, and routinely takes place within the first 2 years of a newly elected Assembly. The 18th Assembly's Commission was comprised of 3 members, Mr. Norman Yakalaya, who was the Commission Chair, Ms. Donna Allen, and Mr. John Hazenberg. In August 2018, the Commission submitted its report to the Speaker, who tabled it on October 11, 2018. The report makes 11 recommendations for consideration. With the exception of a recommended increase to the compensation for the Chair of the Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures to make equivalent to the compensation of other committee chairs, this report recommends no increases to the compensation and benefits of MLAs. The purpose of our debate this afternoon is to publicly review and consider each of the Commission's recommendations. The recommendations adopted by the House today will be considered by the Board of Management, who will use them to make recommended changes to legislation and amend existing regulations and policies. Any changes to legislation will be brought back to the Assembly for consideration in one of the 2 remaining sittings. Changes to regulation or policy resulting from the recommendations will be tabled by the Speaker. Consistent with long-standing practice, all changes to MLA compensation and benefits resulting from this process will take effect at the commencement of the next Legislative Assembly. This concludes my opening remarks, Mr. Chair. Once other members have offered their general observations, I am prepared to introduce motions to adopt the Commission's recommendations. Merci, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Any further comments? Mr. Riley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the 3 members of the Commission, Mr. Yakalai, Ms. Allen, Mr. Hazenberg, for the work that they did. I did meet with them personally while they were doing their work. I want to thank them for the thoughtful report that they put together, and just reiterate again that while we go through these recommendations, none of them apply to sitting MLAs. They will only apply to the people that are elected for the 19th Assembly. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Any further questions, committee? Seeing none. Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that an exit strategy for members of the Legislative Assembly be developed and implemented as a resource for all who are leaving politics. Mr. Chair, this recommendation, as well as the next 2, address the supports that are provided to members who do not return to the next Assembly. They propose development of an exit strategy for members and allowing them to access support services for up to a year after they leave office. This particular motion calls for the development of an exit strategy for outgoing members to address such issues as the avoidance of conflicts of interest in their post-retirement life, the disposal of public assets and equipment, records management and disposal, and an understanding of the tax implications of retirement benefits, such as pensions, transition, and retraining allowances. Mr. Chair, I support this recommendation.
Okay, we'll try this again. There's a little procedural mishap, but we'll try this again. Ms. Green?
Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that an exit strategy for members of the Legislative Assembly be developed and implemented as a resource for all who are leaving politics.
Thank you. There's motion on the floor. Yes, Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair, this recommendation, as well as the next two, address the supports that are provided to members who do not return to the next Assembly. They propose development of an exit strategy for members and allow them to access support services for up to a year after they leave office. This particular motion calls for the development of an exit strategy for outgoing members to address such issues as the avoidance of conflict of interest in their post-retirement life, the disposal of public assets and equipment, records management and disposal, and an understanding of the tax implications of retirement benefits such as pensions, transition, and retraining allowances. Mr. Chair, I support this recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, Mr. Riley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I support this recommendation as well. For those that are transitioning out of political life, sometimes there can be some traumatic changes, and what this is proposing to do is to just make sure that there's some guidance in place to help with that kind of transition. We already have a retraining assistance program that can provide assistance up to $10,000 for members as they move back into private life. But this is, I think, just recognizing and comes from the members of the Commission that sometimes there's other things that people have to consider in terms of retirement and pensions and so on. So this is just making sure that there's a more holistic approach to MLAs as they transition into private life, and for that reason I support it. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. To the motion, Ms. Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as yesterday when we were talking about assisting women to get into politics, and I spoke about not knowing the roles and responsibilities as a minister, I know that when we first became elected members that we were given an orientation session, but in all honesty it was a blur. Things came really fast, and I hardly remember any part of that. So one thing I've learned my roles, and one minister, I have to give credit to the MLA from Great Slave, who taught me that never do anything unethical, illegal, or immoral, and I respect that, and I've upheld that throughout my term here. I want to make sure that when I recognize it's for the next Assembly, but I want to make sure that any members that leave have full comprehension on what they're dealing with and what their obligations were. So I fully support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. Any further questions, committee? Seeing none, to the motion. Question's been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carried. To the motion. Okay. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this Assembly recommends that the Government of the Northwest Territories should pay for the Planning for Retirement course or the Successful Transition to Retirement course for any member who is leaving the government at the end of their term.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair, this recommendation should properly refer to the Legislative Assembly and not the government, but its intention is clear. The government provides excellent courses to the public service to plan not only for the financial aspects of retirement, but also for the emotional and lifestyle implications that are often of equal or greater importance. If adopted, the Board of Management will consider whether the fee for this course will become an allowable constituency budget expense or will be paid by the Legislative Assembly. I support this recommendation, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, next we have Mr. Van Thyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I appreciate the comments and the points noted by the previous speaker, I too recognize that this line item or this particular motion actually should have made maybe reference to the Legislative Assembly rather than the Government of the Northwest Territories as the payee. But that aside, I'm of the opinion that while I supported the previous motion with regard to an exit strategy and that there should be support provided in that way, I feel that members who are planning to retire or in some instances are not re-elected have the obligation within their own purview to plan ahead and do their retirement planning and take that into their own as their own personal responsibility through the time in which they are here in the Legislative Assembly. I feel that they have access to our Human Resources Division and including the Legislative Assembly's corporate Director of Corporate Affairs here to help them with their planning as it relates to their retirement. And so for those reasons, I won't be in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Thyn. To the motion, Mr. Riley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, unlike the previous speaker, I will be supporting this. I think most good employers do actually provide some assistance with pension and retirement planning, and I don't know why the Legislative Assembly would be any different. And I think we should be doing this for the members that are not returning. So I will support the motion. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. To the motion, Mr. Tester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I agree with my friend, the honourable member from Yellowknife North on this one. I think there's a distinction between the roles that we play in this assembly and the benefits and allowances that are afforded to us by virtue of those offices. It's very different than, say, a lengthy career in the public service or with a private employer. Those kind of transitions are expected, and if you have a good employer, a good job, and a good career at that job, you're more likely going to continue on and receiving that support as a tangible benefit. I don't think that this will have the end result of adding much to attracting members to run for office or anything like that. I think this benefit is properly dealt with, or this issue is properly dealt with through the individual interests of members. Not everyone who leaves politics is going to be retiring. And I think that the nature of our roles with 4-year terms, this doesn't fit as well as some of the other recommendations about leaving politics. And I don't think it's necessary, and I won't be supporting it. Thank you.
Tester. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that members of the Legislative Assembly continue to have access to the N.W.T. Employee and Family Assistance Program, known as EFAP, for 1 year after their term as a member of the Legislative Assembly ends.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Motion is on the floor. Motion is in order. To the motion, Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair, members of the Legislative Assembly, like members of the public service, have access to the N.W.T. Employee and Family Assistance Program. Access to this program continues for 1 year after our employees retire. This recommendation reaffirms the ability of MLAs to access the program for 1 year after leaving office. The EFAP or EFAP provides valuable resource material and counseling services for a wide range of personal and family challenges that may continue into retirement. Mr. Chair, I support this recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, Mr. Riley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I too support this motion. The information that we've received is also that this would cost about $100 per year per member who doesn't return and would like to be able to access the service. So it really is a minimal cost, and I think it provides the kind of support that some people may need as they leave political life. So I'm in support of this. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. Next we have Ms. Minister Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's well known that my degree is in social work, and basic concept of social work is wellness, mental wellness as well. Never in my career have I ever been in a position that I have had so many people appreciate my work and so many people hate me for my work. So I am a degreed social worker. I've had 20-some years experience in that. I know self-care. I know where to go for clinical support for myself. I'm not 100% sure that other people do have that. The other issue is that when you leave here, depending on how you do in this house, you might not be offered a job. Jobs might not be as plentiful as they come. So I think that in order to ensure that we are treating our members properly and that we're caring for their mental well-being, that this should be something that is provided. I am fully in support of this motion. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. For the record, I do appreciate the work you do. To the motion. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this Assembly recommends that more detailed information about members' expenses be published on the government website as a separate document by June 30th of the following fiscal year.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Motion is in order. To the motion, Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair, the Legislative Assembly currently publishes details of members' constituency budget expenditures as an appendix to its annual report. I note that the Speaker tabled the annual report for the 2017-18 fiscal year earlier today. This recommendation calls for more detailed, timely, and accessible information than what is currently provided, particularly for such categories as travel and office expenditures. Other Canadian jurisdictions, as well as our own Executive Council, have taken steps to provide this information online and in significant detail. If adopted, the Board of Management will develop a revised policy with respect to the posting of detailed expenditures online. Mr. Chair, I support this recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that the Public Service Health Care Plan dues at the level available to senior managers in the public service be paid by the Government of the Northwest Territories for all members of the Legislative Assembly.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion. Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair, there is currently a disparity between the health benefits provided to regular members and members of the Executive Council, as well as premiums paid by each. This motion recommends that all members of the Legislative Assembly be treated equally with respect to health, dental, and disability benefits, and that they be consistent with the benefits provided to senior managers in the GNWT. Mr. Chair, I support this recommendation.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, Mr. Riley.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd like to thank the Commission for bringing this to our attention. I didn't know about it as a regular MLA, that there was 2 tiers of health care insurance between regular MLAs and our cabinet and the Speaker. So I thank them for bringing this to our attention. As I understand the information that we've been provided, the cost of doing this for the 11 regular MLAs, the additional premiums would be about $9,500 a year, and I think that it's only fair that all MLAs should be treated equally, so I do support this. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that if it is decided to not pay for the same level of medical travel, health, dental, and life insurance benefits for all members of the Legislative Assembly, that the additional paid benefits for the Speaker and Ministers be removed from their benefit package, and the Speaker and Ministers become responsible for paying that benefit. And further, that all members of the Legislative Assembly would then receive the extended healthcare benefit and level 1 of the hospital benefit at no cost. I'm going to explain it.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Motion is in order. To the motion. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Given that the House adopted the previous recommendation, this recommendation is redundant. The previous motion directed the Board of Management to make health, dental, and disability benefits and premiums for regular members consistent with those for cabinet ministers. As a result, this recommendation is not necessary, and I will be voting against it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is defeated. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that this Assembly recommends that the indemnity for extra duty for the Chair of the Rules and Procedures Committee be increased from $3,194 to $6,296 per year.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion. Mr. Myself here. Ms. Green.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, the previous Legislative Assembly reduced the indemnity paid to the Chair of the Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures to make it equivalent to that paid to the caucus chair and deputy chairs of Committee of the Whole. This change was made on the understanding that the workload of this committee is less than that for other standing committees of the House. As my colleague from Frame Lake will attest, this has not been the case for the current Assembly. The Standing Committee on Rules and Procedures was given some very heavy lifting in the first 2 years of our Assembly and still has some left. I agree that the chair of this committee should be compensated on an equal basis to other chairs. I support this motion, Mr. Chair, but would like to move an amendment to remove the reference to the specific dollar amounts, which are adjusted annually by the Consumer Price Index. May I have permission to amend the motion?
Committee will just take a 5-minute recess. There's typo in the motion. Thank you. Thank you, committee. We'll now call committee of the whole back to order. There's a motion to amend. Okay. Ms. Green, do you have an amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that the motion be amended by striking out the words, quote, increased from $3,194 to $6,296 per year, end quote, and substituting the words, quote, consistent with that paid to other standing committee chairs, end quote. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Green. A motion to amend. The motion is in order on the floor. To the motion. To the motion to amend. Question? Question's been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. To the motion as amended, sorry.
Question.
All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that members of the Legislative Assembly who hire a constituency assistant who does not have access to health and dental benefits should provide those paid benefits through Northern Employee Benefits Services as part of the constituency assistance employment package. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, every member of this House is supported in their work by hardworking and dedicated constituency assistants. These employees are the only ones who work in this building without access to health and dental benefits. The motion allows some flexibility to members who may wish to tailor the work of their assistants to meet their unique circumstances. If adopted, this motion will provide direction to the Board of Management to negotiate a benefits plan with Northern Employee Benefit Services that both the member and the constituency assistants will contribute to. Mr. Chair, I support this motion.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, Mr. Van Tine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I too will be in support. I think that a version of this motion comes forward almost every time the Independent Commission does their review. I'm happy that the Commission does recognize the efforts that our constituent assistants put in support of us as members. All of us, to some degree, would certainly be lost and very much challenged in the day-to-day work that we do on behalf of the residents of the Northwest Territories if we didn't have the incredible support provided by our constituent assistants. And so, while each constituent assistant's circumstances are different with regard to their hiring arrangements with their particular MLAs, it is still I believe, incumbent upon this government, in particular the Assembly, to support all staff that supports the work of the day-to-day efforts of the Legislative Assembly. And other than our constituent assistants, virtually everybody has access to these kind of benefits. And so I think this is long overdue, and I'll be in support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Tine. Next we have Minister Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've said again many times in the House, or all over the place, is that a society is based by how we treat our most vulnerable in society. I came here to advocate for low-income people, and this, in my opinion, fits that model. Our constituency assistants are paid, in average, just above the living wage that was brought out. Thank you to Alternatives North for bringing that out. So these people end up being, many of them, not all, but many of them suffer. And dental is a luxury that many people on low income cannot afford, myself included as a single parent, never seen a dentist for years, and pay the consequence. So I support anything that supports the most vulnerable, the lowest income people in our society, and therefore I support this motion full-heartedly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. To the motion, Mr. Nakamayak. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Along with what my colleague said across the way, I too support this. Mr. Chair, we have constituent assistants that live in Yellowknife and some that live in the northern part of the territories where the cost of living is high. While we're sitting here and we're giving chairs of committees raises, and we're not covering the simple benefits that any of our employees should have access to. I think we need to really look at that and take a look deeper into the next assembly to refine it to adjust to the cost of living. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Nakamayak. Next we have Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just want to make it clear that chairs of committees are not getting a raise as a result of the work that the Commission did in this Assembly. There may be a small adjustment to the next Assembly, the members that serve there, but there's no increases for members' compensation or benefits that were recommended by the Commission, and we'll see how the rest of the debate plays out. But I do support this motion. I think we need to treat our constituency assistants as valued employees and make sure that they have access to health care and other sorts of benefits that are available through the Northern Employee Benefits Services. So this is just about being a good employer, and I think we want to make sure that we treat our employees in the manner that they deserve to be treated. So I support this motion. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Next we have Mr. Testard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think all of my honourable colleagues would agree that our constituency assistants, the people who occupy that role, are very hardworking, capable individuals who are essential to the good functioning of the representation of our constituents. And the North often struggles with finding the kind of talent that you need to do well in various professions, whether it's trades or medical or even political work, and being able to provide enhanced benefits and decent wages, I think is going to greatly enhance the ability to attract that kind of staff that you need to ensure that constituency assistants are you're getting the kind of quality you need to have the best possible service for your constituents. I think this is a very important motion. It's going to help future assemblies moving forward to attract that talent and to give those workers a greater benefit and greater opportunity as they perform a different kind of public service, but no less important than the work of the public service itself. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tessert. Next we have Mr. Nadley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I too support this motion. I think it's a long time coming. I just wanted to, thank the constituency assistants that keep our office operations going. And they also serve as the link to our communities and our ridings. So it's so I wanted to say thank you for the constituency assistants that man our offices when we're not there. I think this is just timely, and I support it, and it goes a long ways in terms of helping our people that work for this institution, and it should have been done years ago. And it just helps the small communities, especially the economy, where jobs are very hard to come by. And so for those reasons, I support a step towards at least bringing benefits to our constituency assistants. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Nadley. Next we have Mr. McNeely.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I too agree with the motion and agree with all the comments from my previous colleagues' statements here. I just wanted to add to this, one of the additional assets that is overlooked by the previous statements is the ability to speak the native language with a lot of the elders. And residents in our respective ridings, so that should be recognized as well. It just makes communication and explanation to medical assistants or program assistants that much more easier in getting the message what can be done by our office to the constituents that brought their issues forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McNeely. To the motion, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too will be supporting this motion. What we're looking at for a full-time person is about $3,200 a year, up to a family of, which is about $5,100 a year, but it comes out of our constituent assistance, or our budget, so it's actually coming out of there, helping this, and it's very much needed. We're competing with other jobs that do have benefits that are needed for people to work, and we'd like to be able to keep good quality people in place and give them this these benefits as well. So I think this is a good solution to that issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. To the motion, question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that the current non-taxable allowances, brackets allowance for expenses and entertainment allowance, become accountable allowances.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair, last year the Government of Canada announced that non-taxable allowances paid to politicians would become taxable as of January 1st this year. Currently, all members are paid an allowance of roughly $7,500 to cover miscellaneous expenses that are not reimbursable from their constituency budgets. MLAs are constantly called upon to provide financial assistance to constituents, attend public events that charge a fee, purchase raffle tickets, and participate in silent auctions, to name a few items. They are often called upon to buy meals or coffee for constituents or travel within their constituencies using their personal vehicles. The fact that these allowances are paid without the need for receipts allows members to provide unique support services to constituents without breaching confidentiality. In order for these allowances to remain non-taxable, they must become reimbursable only by receipt. This defeats the intended purpose of the allowance. One alternative to this recommendation is to gross up the value of the allowance to make it equivalent on an after-tax basis. This would, however, result in additional costs to the public. Mr. Chair, it is my view that rather than reduce the flexibility that members currently have or increase costs, the allowances should remain at their existing levels and be taxed. I will therefore not be supporting this motion, and I should note that a second non-taxable allowance is provided to out-of-town members to reimburse them for the costs of travel to and from work while in the capital, as well as other miscellaneous costs associated with running a second residence. I understand that the Speaker is seeking confirmation from the Canada Revenue Agency that this allowance will remain non-taxable. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, Mr. Van Tine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I find myself in support of the previous speaker's comments. I feel that we already do have a particular allowance called the constituency allowance that is an accountable allowance, and that one has very strict rules and guidelines from which we have to follow as it relates to expenditure from that account. But as it relates to the non-taxable, or what was the non-taxable allowance, having it remain unaccountable, or having it not have to hand in receipts, I feel is the proper way in which to manage this. As the previous speaker alluded to, we have a number of requests to support different charities, festivals, even school recreation programs, sporting and recreation events, certain auctions and different various fundraisers. And I think that those are by and large done on the basis of each individual member's choices, and those organizations that they choose to support are by and large their choices. And so I think that, you know, that members could be potentially put into an awkward situation that if all of a sudden that expenditure becomes public information, then members could possibly start to feel pressure from other organizations saying, well, if you supported them, why don't you support me, and that sort of thing. So I think that that needs to remain the choices of the members themselves. And so for those reasons, I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Thyn, to the motion. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just to be clear, I support the position that we vote against the recommendation, which is what this motion is all about. Right now, these allowances are treated as taxable income. We are now paying taxes on them effective January the 1st. So that we don't have any choice in that matter. That decision was made for us by Revenue Canada. So what the motion and the recommendation from the Commission was, and the motion is that those allowances now become accountable. And I think I've heard from all the speakers that we don't think that that's a good way to proceed. So if that's what you believe, then we should be voting against this recommendation, against the motion. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. To the motion, question has been called. All those in favour? All those opposed? The motion is defeated. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just ask my colleagues to bear with me. This is one of these motions which builds on the one before. I move that this Assembly recommends that the current amounts be set at the maximum reimbursable annual amount, brackets allowance for expenses is $7,884 in Yellowknife and $14,968 outside of Yellowknife, and $1,500 entertainment allowance for the Speaker and Ministers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, given the defeat of the previous recommendation, this motion is redundant. The amounts for the allowances paid to members will remain at their current levels and will now be taxable. I will therefore not vote in favor of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is defeated. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that the Board of Management develop a more detailed policy specific to allowable expenses to ensure clarity for the member. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair, as with the last recommendation, this recommendation is redundant. The expense allowance paid to all members will remain non-accountable and will become taxable, or has become taxable. I will therefore not be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is defeated. Ms. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I move that this Assembly recommends that the member's salary be renewed on April 1st each year, calculated on the current Yellowknife Consumer Price Index, or the increase negotiated by the Union of Northern Workers, whichever is less. Thank you.
Order to the motion. Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair, I am not in support of this motion. Years ago, the annual adjustments to the MLA salaries were tied to the negotiated increases for our unionized employees. This created the perception of a conflict of interest. Under our current system, MLA compensation for an incoming assembly is established by the outgoing one and based on the recommendations of an independent commission. Following that, these amounts are adjusted annually to keep pace with inflation. The decision to disentangle MLA compensation adjustments from those provided to the Union of Northern Workers has been to the detriment of MLAs over the years. I have no difficulty with this. However, this recommendation reestablishes a link with the UNW increases that I feel is inappropriate. It will ensure that over time, MLA compensation will fail to keep pace with inflation and fall further behind the positions of similar responsibility in the public service. The existing system is transparent, fair, and independent. Mr. Chair, I will not be supporting this motion, and I request a recorded vote.
Thank you, Ms. Green. To the motion, Ms. Minister Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I as well will not be supporting this motion. As I've said previously and many times, the society is based on how we treat our most marginalized populations. It would be very hypocritical of me to look at any type of increase, no matter what, until society is treating those who struggle to provide food on their table with a decent level of care. So I cannot, in all honesty, ethically support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Minister Cochrane. To the motion, Mr. Riley.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I will not be supporting the a recommendation from the Commission, which is the subject of this motion. It basically says that we should be taking the lesser of the cost of living increase or what the UNW negotiates, tying our compensation to what's negotiated with our workers. I don't think that's a good way to proceed. It creates apprehension of bias, and I just don't think that's a good thing to do. The simpler way to do this is leave it as it is, where it's automatically increased by the consumer price index. I think that's the best way to do this, and I want to leave it that way, so I'll be voting against this recommendation from the Commission and the motion. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. To the motion. Question has been called. The member has requested a recorded vote. All those in favor, please rise.
The member for Great Slave.
All those opposed, please rise.
The member for Yellowknife Centre, the member for Deschaux, the member for N.W.T, the member for Range Lake, the member for Satu, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Nahende, the member for Frame Lake.
Thank you. All those abstaining, please rise.
The member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, the member for Hay River South, the member for Tabacha.
Two never voted. Thank you, committee. All those in favor, 1. All those opposed, 9. Abstentions, 4. Motion is defeated. Ms. Green.
Mr. Chair, I wish to thank the 2018 Independent Commission to review members' compensation and benefits for their important work and for their considered recommendations. As with previous recommendations, we have accepted some and rejected others. This process of reviewing MLA compensation by an independent commission is consistent with the practice of other Canadian jurisdictions and the process for setting judicial compensation in the N.W.T. It works. Contrary to recent media reports, MLAs have not voted themselves an increase in compensation above inflation for nearly 2 decades, despite at least one recommendation to do so from an independent commission in the 15th Assembly. Mr. Chair, no one in this room entered politics for the money. Many around this room left higher-paying jobs in the private sector, public sector, or with Indigenous governments to seek elected office in this institution. The compensation system for MLAs needs to be fair, open, and transparent. It also needs to be effective. MLA compensation needs to be adequate to draw talented people away from their private employment, yet not so low that only the rich can afford to seek office. I think we have struck a reasonable balance, Mr. Chair. Those are all of my comments.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Thank you, committee. Do you agree that we have concluded consideration of table document 237-18 brackets 3? Agreed. Thank you, committee. We have now concluded consideration of this table document. What is the wish of committee, Mr. Tesser?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move the chair rise and report progress.
Thank you. I will now rise and report progress. Oh, sorry. Thank you, committee. There's a motion in order to rise and report progress. Motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
May I have the report, member for Mackenzie Delta?
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering table document 237-18 brackets 3 and would like to report progress with 7 motions carried and that table document 237-18 brackets 3 is concluded. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Thank you.
Seconder, member for Yellowknife Center. Motions in order. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carried. Third reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the honourable member for Hay River South, that Bill 50, Supplementary Appropriation Act Infrastructure Expenditures Number 4, 2018-2019 be read for the third time. And Mr. Speaker, I would request a recorded vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member requested for a recorded vote. Motions in order to the motion. Questions been called. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, the member for Hay River South, the member for Tabacha, the member for Mackenzie Delta, the member for Satu, the member for Hay River North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Nahende, the member for Yellowknife Center, the member for Decho, the member for Nunakput, the member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Range Lake, the member for Great Slave.
Good catch, Mr. Clerk. All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The results of the recorded vote, 14 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Motion carried. Bill 50 has had its third reading. Third reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the honourable member for Great Slave, that Bill 51, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Operation Expenditures Number 4, 2018-19 be read for the third time. And Mr. Speaker, I would request a recorded vote. Second.
Member requested for a recorded vote. Motions in order. To the motion. Questions been called. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, the member for Hay River South, the member for Tabacha, the member for Mackenzie Delta, the member for Satu, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Nahende, the member for Yellowknife Center, the member for Decho, the member for Nunakput, the member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Range Lake, the member for Great Slave.
All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The results of the recorded vote, 14 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Motion carried. Bill 51 has had its third reading. Third reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I move, second by the honourable member for Great Slave, that Bill 52, Supplementary Appropriation Act Infrastructure Expenditures Number 1, 2019-2020 be read for the third time. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request a recorded vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Massey. Member requested for a recorded vote. Motions in order. To the motion. Questions been called. All those in favor, please stand.
Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, member for Hay River South, member for Tabacha, member for Hay River North. Hey, Hay River North. Oh, he's not here. Sorry. Oh. I'm new at this game. The member for Mackenzie Delta, member for Sawtoo, member for Yellowknife North, member for Cam Lake, member for Nahende, member for Yellowknife Center, Yellowknife, member for Decho, member for N.W.T, member for Inuvik Lake, member for Range Lake, member for Yellowknife South.
Great job.
I'm sorry, Great Slaves. Alrighty.
All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The results of the recorded vote, 14 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Motion carried. Bill 52 has had a third reading. Third reading of bills. Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, I move second by the honourable member for Great Slave that Bill 53, Supplementary Appropriation Act Operation Expenditures, Number 1, 2019-2020, be read for the third time. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request a recorded vote.
Member requested for a recorded vote. Motions in order to the motion. Questions been called. All those in favor, please stand.
The member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, the member for Hay River South, the member for Tabacha, the member for Mackenzie Delta, the member for Sawtoo, the member for Yellowknife North, the member for Cam Lake, the member for Nahende, the member for Yellowknife Center, the member for Decho, the member for N.W.T, the member for Inuvik Boot Lake, the member for Range Lake, the member for Great Slave.
All those opposed, please stand. All those abstain, please stand. The results of the recorded vote, 14 in favor, 0 opposed, 0 abstention. Motion carried. Bill 53 has had its third reading. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, would you ascertain that the Honorable Commissioner of Northwest Territories is ready to enter the chamber to assent to bills?
Please be seated. Ajok avi afit efewitaga masi. Ejok ashunai hefitaga shuse masi nethen. Ajon ejotati kauteke. La N.W.T guti metaure a meterincha kotse ketse andele anafenta eti tetonisa N.W.T za Meniedente asaga masi. Ishitse oneta dule tenejatieta na hetzekose. Ishiga kukie sinie kutse masinefe. Echokotse koti anahtega enite se na hetzaudundi. Sataitze tse kwave ajon na hega konezu kotse nezu natashi. Tute kutlinde matseteke ajon na hega konozu kotse nezu tsunta ga enafeta kutli egalanda eshiga ajon masi na henife. Mr. Speaker, members of the Legislative Assembly, good afternoon. It is indeed a great honor to be back in this chamber and to give recognition to Indigenous Languages Month in the Northwest Territories. By designating March as Indigenous Language Month, this government believed in the importance of Indigenous languages and has the respect to promote its revitalization everywhere possible. I am grateful to be able to speak my Dene language here in the chamber of the Legislative Assembly building. I want to wish you all a well-deserved break, safe travels, and a happy and blessed Easter in just a few weeks. I would like to wish each of you well in the next chapter of your work with and for the betterment of all Northerners. Now, as Commissioner of the Northwest Territories, I am pleased to assent to the following bills. Bill 50, Supplementary Appropriation Act, bracket, Infrastructure Expenditures, bracket number 4, 2018. Bill 51, Supplementary Appropriation Act, bracket Operations Expenditures, number 4, 2018-2019. Bill 52, Supplementary Appropriation Act, Infrastructure, bracket Infrastructure Expenditures, bracket number 1, 2019-2020. Bill 53, Supplementary Appropriation Act, bracket Operations Expenditures, bracket number 1, 2019-2020. Masicho, thank you. Kwanani, merci beaucoup, Kwana. Order.
Please be seated. Members, so ta let's dia na hut ahonde. And I equate that zone commissioner good yanza must wisin. And that good on that must wisin for the. I use law that the lanat sake a lot the members yasin. And I get Tazata on the Sadi. And I sit on Galas in down there. Okay, then such a dad, you know, such a lot down there. It's on the Sukuga like it, what the pages again, what you must see. But it's on the 9 and out down there. It's a Shina wood, half on there. And that's ideas on, may have what's on. That's it, the way we are, that we get new wagon and now. There's in the hardy, 9 and out there. It's a Shina here on the house in one day. Colleagues, I'd like to extend appreciation of this House to the Commissioner, Margaret and Tom. It was a pleasure to have her in the House today. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for all the hard work that you have pursued and the dedication to this House and to all the people whom we represent. During the past 6 weeks, we have achieved a great deal, and you should be proud of the work that you have done. We have not always seen eye to eye, and at the same time, we have some disagreements along the way, but we managed to remain professional, respectful to each other, and also to this institution. I would especially like to recognize the Dean of this House, the Honorable Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes, who yesterday announced that he will not be seeking re-election this fall. Just so members are aware, Robert C. McLeod and I were by-elected. Well, he was a year before me, and a year after I was in a by-election as well. So I guess we were the two old-timers in this House. And I know that this decision is not one that he made lightly, as we've seen yesterday. And I can honestly say that this place would not be the same without him here. Colleagues, no member of this House can remember the time when a member for Inuvik Twin Lakes was not here. For each of us, he has been part of this institution over the years. He has served many roles in this House. More than that, he has been a mentor to many of us, as we've heard from member statements. I included as well. His experience, his knowledge, and his guidance have been invaluable. Without his contribution, this House would not be a place as it is today. So colleagues, over the next few months, we will have many opportunities to say farewell. But I personally want to say thank you to a member for Inuvik Twin Lakes for his dedication, commitment to this House, and also wish him all the best as he prepares for another journey from public life. So I'd like to say Masi. And also to his family that were here with us yesterday. Our loss is your gain. Please enjoy your time with him. Colleagues, I would also like to thank the interpreters, the pages that have been with us through the last 6 weeks. Please know that your assistance and your contributions are valued and appreciated. It is a pleasure to share this chamber with a young generation. I would also like to take this opportunity to remind our young people that the Legislative Assembly will be hosting our next Youth Parliament from May 6th to the 10th of this year, 2019. This is a great opportunity for grade 9, grade 10 students in the Northwest Territories to assume the role of their MLA at the Legislative Assembly in Yellowknife. The deadline for application is April 5th It's fast approaching, so you have to apply. For more information, please visit Legislative Assembly website or contact our public affairs team. And colleagues, I wish each of you safe travels to your home communities as you return to your constituencies. I know that many of you and many of the people who you represent will be out on the land for the next few weeks, enjoying our land and taking part in various hunts and traditional activities. At the same time, there will be busy times as the committee will be traveling to different communities as well. We are blessed to live in such a beautiful territory. Please remember to treat it well, with respect, and be safe while out on the land and also into the communities. With that, Madam Clerk, orders of the day.
Indai zeng edani lege di ha wek eati. Din zeng tondu za nai no tai. Nakilemi huno datso pluto ho kote infle tani ni o. Hayat eti awde hayati eketet sodun hayati indi awde dawets inke ile gotso nagode. Haton gogake kwe kizi hats edi. Asi wek edzon ats ehi. Awde da gets eke. Nintleta da ets eke. Indi nintleta da ets inke ile gotso nagogede. Commissioner Weatik e Hayats eti goizi asti teke. Standing aids on special committees on amigo di wets on. Nawode we ginda wego di. Donate ala nintle girada ha negele. Nawon wekedzon ra yati nita aquetlon nawon nitle wekedzon ha hats edi. Nawon hotle aquetlon nawon nitle weketi. Nank e ton nawon nitle weketi. Nawon tala wehon tlegeti ha hoon. Bill 26, Bill 30, Committee Report 15-18-3, Minister Statement 131, 151, and 158-18-3. Edani thlegati wegon hagedi taitson nawon nitle weketi. Indaidze edani thlegeti ha weketi.
Good job. Members, let's at the did zega nakon eonde. In the let's at the Dean Zenda, May 23, 2019, in Shatani Wiki Hu, the Wiki Hu beyond.